Good morning and welcome to Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. Marvel is very busy these days. We've been talking a lot about their big screen work, both with Ant-Man and Doctor Strange, and they really have dominated the headlines. And Marvel these days is so prolific that they can continue to dominate because they just have so many projects to discuss. Today, specifically, their Netflix initiative, which I think is appropriate to discuss because I think eventually it will tie into the cinematic universe. It's another offshoot, and I feel that while Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. has been somewhat marginalized, I wonder if it would have been marginalized if it had been more successful. But I think obviously Marvel has higher hopes for their Netflix programming, and as we all know, Netflix and of course cable television, which Netflix is modeled after, these very prestigious shows are getting very, very close to movies in quality and fan fervor, I guess you could say. So it's not inconceivable that this would be a closer match to maybe someday see the Defenders that are going to exist over on Netflix jump over to the Avengers or be more referenced, etc. So, but I don't know if that'll work if this casting continues. And the person in particular everyone talked about yesterday was the news that Vincent D'Onofrio has been cast as the Kingpin, aka Wilson Fisk. A lot of people were excited about this news, but to those people who are excited, I would say go watch The Escape Plan, that Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger movie from last year. It wasn't that bad, actually. The Escape Plan, I thought, had its moments, and it was good, some good classic Stallone Schwarzenegger action, and it was a clever movie. But one of the worst parts of it was Vincent D'Onofrio, and if Vincent D'Onofrio is the weak link in a current Sylvester Stallone Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, you know you have some problems. Now, of course, he was playing kind of a, like a schlubby guy, like a real, weasel. And that's, of course, not the acting muscles he will be flexing as the Kingpin. So perhaps, that just wasn't the right role for him. But, regardless, the acting on display was not what you might expect from someone that Marvel was going to choose. And the whole thing, I know we were a little bit concerned about Charlie Cox, and then of course you have Scott Derrickson on Doctor Strange, and I discussed, taking a second look at the Deliver Us from Evil trailer and still not understanding what Marvel saw. And I've been discussing this with a few people, and what they seem to think, and I think this might be correct, is that what Marvel sees is a bargain. And as Marvel continues to expand at an exponential rate into very different mediums and genres, the question is, how can they afford to do this? I mean, of course, Disney has a lot of money, but it's not a bottomless checkbook. It's going to, bottom out at some point. And they're very spread out at this point with Pixar and the acquisition of Star Wars. And of course, we can see the Star Wars brand is going to become quite prolific and expansive. And you're seeing, I think, some low-budget choices over there. So at what point is this, is Disney being savvy with their money and their choices, frugal? And at what point are they going to just come across as cheap? Robert Rodriguez crossed this line himself, and I commented on his latest Sin City: A Dame to Kill For trailer that it looked like he was so consumed with making films on the cheap that had overtaken the making quality his top priority. I think he almost is so enamored, you can almost tell he's like, do you see that shot? Well, might not only be impressed with it, but guess how much it costs to make. And you're like, I don't really care, Robert. I just want it to be a good shot and to be an entertaining movie. I mean, I care so much in that you can afford to keep making these movies and that, they turn a profit so you can keep your investors happy and the studios happy. But, I'm not really, I think only film students can really be impressed with a bargain, like how someone manages to put something together on the cheap. And I think audiences are like, what, it just wasn't good. Cheapness, that does not create entertainment in the long run. So I just don't want to see Marvel go down that path. And I think that Vincent D'Onofrio is very television, and I think a very risky choice. I don't know why they wouldn't perhaps pick unknowns. They could have done some green screen action. I continue to be impressed with the giants that were on display in the last episode of Game of Thrones, and I was reading some behind-the-scenes, interviews with the director talking about how those were like 8-foot tall actors that they shot in front of a green screen to superimpose, and they built sets down in terms of scale. And I think maybe they should be thinking of casting that way, instead of getting a name. I mean, the name here is Marvel. The name is Netflix. The name is Daredevil. That's what's going to get people excited. And it's a little similar to the Godzilla situation, where, you're like the actors, you can take some you can take some risks here because they're not going to be the driving force of getting people to tune in. So I don't know. I just can't get excited about the Vincent D'Onofrio news because I've seen some bad Vincent D'Onofrio acting, and I'm just curious as to what you guys think. Are you genuinely excited, or are you just trying to, really be loyal to Marvel? I'm just curious. I'm curious as to how you think this Netflix property is coming together, and what do you think of this kind of bargain basement, talent deals that Marvel seems to be, Disney as a whole seems to be getting into now because they have just so many commitments. All right, so that's the first story of the day. Now, the second two stories of the day, for some reason, despite the fact that both the Chipmunks live-action CGI hybrid franchise and the Smurfs CGI live-action hybrid franchises are running on fumes to the point where the Smurfs is going back to all animation with their third entry because the second one was so disappointing. Despite those two live-action CGI hybrid films doing so poorly right now, those franchises, two other companies are still going to try their hand at it. And I guess because there was just so much money made initially with the first, I think the first two Chipmunks actually were quite successful. And of course that first Smurfs movie made like over 500 million worldwide. It was just phenomenal. Who would have ever expected that? But Sony couldn't duplicate that success. But Sony is moving forward still in this area with another property, and so is Nickelodeon. So we're going to discuss both of these today, and I think we're going to talk about the bigger one first in my eyes, and that's the Sonic the Hedgehog movie. Now, with both of these properties, the other is SpongeBob, as you can see from the pictures today. I think there's some question as to, is it too late? Are these properties too late to the party? Are they still as popular as they once were? Well, apparently Sonic is still a billion-dollar franchise. And I would also argue that the Archie comics for Sonic sell quite well. I remember a couple of months ago doing an interview with the people at Archie Comics, a great company, and they were really promoting a big Sonic crossover, I believe, with Mega Man. Yes, that's who it was. And it was like a big deal for their company, and they said the Sonic comics sell quite well. So there's still interest in this property. It's just not on the mainstream level. The mainstream media hasn't picked up on it, but they all picked up on this Sonic the Hedgehog movie announcement, and I think it's not only because of the property, but the people involved and some of the other aspects that were hinted at the press release. So, Sonic the Hedgehog was coming to a movie screen near you, and he's going to fight Dr. Eggman, but they're going to be, while they'll be CGI animated, they're going to be in a live-action setting. Will they interact with live-action actors, or will it just be a live-action setting? That remains to be seen. This is just the initial announcement. But the people behind it, they have Neil Moritz is the producer. And he's not only behind the Fast and Furious movies, but he's also doing 22 Jump Street. Now, 22 Jump Street, as you might recall, both the first and second are directed by Phil Lord and Chris Miller, the people behind the Lego movie. Now, the Lego movie was incredibly successful, obviously, and I think it's going to bring animation into a new area where the Lego movie was very adult-friendly. Kids liked it, of course, although I did argue that I think adults liked it more than kids, but still, kids went. But there was a lot of fandom getting behind the Lego movie and very excited. They're doing a Ninjago movie, which we discussed here, and it's all because of the smart writing, very clever, adult-friendly writing, even I think more so than we've ever seen before. Computer-animated films in particular have always benefited from working at multiple levels for different age groups, but I think the Lego movie took it to a new level where it was almost primarily for the adults, and the secondary levels of jokes and humors were for the kids. The kids were secondary, which I think is fascinating. So I wonder if Sonic's going to go in that direction, because Neil Moritz has hired two writers from Upright Citizens Brigade to write this script. So that screams Lego movie to me, that kind of thought process. Then also the other big thing that's coming out of this is that Sony will be teaming up with Marza Animation Planet. That's a Japanese company, and they actually are a division of Sega. And the other thing the press release said was that Marza plans to do an animated film a year. And that makes me wonder, will it be a Sega property? Sega, of course, does very well in the video game sphere, obviously. They have a lot of properties. And I'm curious to know, for you video game players, I'm not a video game player. I'm not really into that community. Comics and television and movies and, the current events take up too much of my time. I just hit my breaking point with video games. But I'm curious as to what other properties you would like to see brought to the big screen. Of course, a lot of Ubisoft have been talking a lot about their games going to the big screen. We are on the cusp, I think, of, just like we're in a comic book movie renaissance, I think we're on the cusp of a video game movie renaissance. Right now Resident Evil is the only real game that does well, and a lot of people argue it still isn't faithful to the source material, but we have Splinter Cell coming up, Assassin's Creed, etc., Warcraft, of course. a lot of interesting properties. So why shouldn't Sonic and in large part Sega get in on this action? So that's the second story of the day. The third story is this, as I said, a SpongeBob live-action sequel. He's going to leave the beach. The poster, I think, is very funny. Here you can take a look at it. It says the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water. And they have, I believe that's the Coppertone little baby, play on that. And I think SpongeBob looks pretty good. And of course, this isn't so, this isn't such unfamiliar territory to the show because I've seen a few episodes of SpongeBob, and of course, whenever he leaves the water, that's a real place. But he doesn't turn, I think he turns into a sponge maybe. I don't recall how they handle the actual SpongeBob character. But here he's going to leave, go out into the real world, and I'm sure interact with humans because he has on the show, and even in the original SpongeBob, 2D animated movie, I believe. So that's, I think, definitely going to be a human CGI character interactive situation. But again, I question as to whether or not SpongeBob is, just too old a property, and if this can continue to do well. So I don't know about that one, and I'm curious to how you guys feel. I just really question whether or not this live-action CGI hybrid phase has, passed, and at least needs to take a little bit of more of a breather before it comes back. Because I guess I can see the Sonic movie doing well, but the SpongeBob movie, not so much. As I recall, the first SpongeBob movie didn't even do that well. So we'll see, but I'm curious how you guys feel. Are either of these properties something you'd be willing to pay to see in the theater? And what do you think of taking them into the live action area? Does that make you more excited, or are you like, that's just a gimmick? I would be much more interested in just a good story and keeping them in their universes that I know and love. All right, so those are the three stories of the day. The viewer question comes from Natalie Aurora, who's been very patient and asked this question a number of times, now on multiple channels. So Natalie, today I'm going to answer your question, which I think is interesting to everybody here. That's another reason I picked it. Okay, question. Hi Grace, let me say I love your videos. They're the very first videos I watch when I'm on YouTube. Thank you, Natalie. I know there's a lot of videos to choose from here, so I really appreciate that. And Natalie says, thank you for all the work you put into making such an awesome show. And a heart. Oh, I love it when people can put in little emoticons and little pictures. I never know how to do that. So Natalie says, now, we have been talking a lot about girl power in movies, especially in animation and fantasy. I think she's talking about Frozen and Maleficent. So now we have been okay. But as you and others have pointed out, the men have been made to take the back seat, such as Prince Philip and Maleficent. Yes, exactly. That was my big problem with the film, and a number of you were disappointed in the way men were marginalized in both Frozen, I think, but particularly in Maleficent. And we know Disney so she continues, and she says, we know Disney puts a lot more emphasis on the female characters when it comes to merchandise and all. Since my favorite Disney character happens to be a man, Flynn Rider from Tangled, and not a princess, I would love to know, what do you believe it will take for those fantasy fairy tale movies, especially from Disney, to start placing the guys on the front seat? For instance, I've been writing a fairy tale-like story that is told from the male lead's point of view, and it's the princesses, two sisters, who are more on the sidelines. And my male lead is portrayed in a good light. Yet I wonder, in the unlikely scenario it could happen, would companies such as Disney even be interested in this kind of story, or would they just rewrite it and put the princess sisters in the lead roles and take the real lead look like make the real lead your typical token prince? Thanks, and smiley face. Great question, Natalie. I think there's a growing interest in the male characters. I did a video about this. I'll put a link to it at the end of this about there are a lot of male characters front and center in 2014. You had, of course, in the Lego movie, you had Emmett. You have Hiccup in How to Train Your Dragon. You have Hiro Hamada in Big Hero 6. There are a lot of male leads this year, and we'll see how these movies do. Natalie, of course, as we always discuss here, that is what's going to make Hollywood decide what to do. If these male lead movies can perform, if Hiccup's fan base, all the people who ship him and Merida and write about him with Rapunzel and Jack Frost and Merida and them all fighting together Avengers style, if that fan base can show up, of course I think that these animation studios will focus more on male characters. But so far, really only Aladdin has been a lead in a film, an animated film. And Jack Frost, of course, despite all his popularity, Rise of the Guardians was not a big performer for DreamWorks Animation. Actually, it was one of their trouble points, and why you're seeing them flip around Home and Penguins of Madagascar, because they just can't continue to take these kinds of losses. Now, of course, maybe if Jack Frost had been the star of his movie and they hadn't bogged it down with other characters, it might have been a different story. But so we'll see what happens with Hiccup. I think that's going to be a big, big point, a big, very crucial point in male leads in animation, if he can deliver at the box office. And I think specifically the decision to age him up, that's also very integral. But I think that until merchandise starts selling, we were just talking the other day about merchandising and how why aren't there more female action figures and that they just don't sell. And a number of you argued, I think correctly, that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They don't sell because women and girls don't know that these action figures exist. There's no advertising really done for them. There's no outreach program to let that demographic know that these toys are available. So then when they don't sell, they say, look, see, no, they don't sell. And, it never continues. So I think that's the same situation on the other side with typically girl toys, Disney fairy tales, that, oh, the boy toys don't sell. But I think anyone walking down the aisle would notice at the toy store that they don't do a particular job making these characters, these male toys, look like the characters from the movie. Although I argue not the female characters either. I don't know who does the models, the faces for Disney toys, but I think they're really off. But again, those toys aren't selling. Do they really exist? Not really. I'm sure you have a very hard time, Natalie, finding Flynn Rider merchandise. But would it sell if it did? Gaston is starting to be somebody who sells some merchandise because he has his own tavern in the new Fantasyland in Walt Disney World. So there is some Prince merchandise, a little bit like there's like a Prince Philip T-shirt, I believe I recall seeing last time I was in Disney World. But still, not a lot of merchandise. And I wish maybe Disney would experiment with their Prince line and to see if maybe there would be some people who are interested. But right now, no. As for you specifically, Natalie, I think it's great that you're writing and, trying to write something different. That's great. I will tell you it's very tricky. As some of you might recall, I wrote my own comic book, Superbia. It got great reviews. I'm so happy that a number of you picked it up and enjoyed it. But I have to tell you, because it was something different, it lasted a year, 12 issues, in addition to its original 4-issue run, so that's 16 issues in total, when I'm very proud of that run. But at the same time, it didn't run further because I was hearing from a number of you, actually, that stores just didn't pick it up because they took one look at the cover and they didn't bother to get to know the story, and they said, I don't think that my readers will buy this. So a number of comic book fans and people in that area never even had the chance to pick up Superbia. So that's the reason I bring that up, Natalie, is that as good as your story might be, if it's so different from what's going on right now, nobody will ever get exposed to it because the powers that be just won't have any faith in it. So my advice to you is, if you think that maybe there isn't a Prince, this is a need that isn't being met, I would tell you, write a strip, do a comic strip online. See if you can get some interest, see if you can kind of get a following and tap into this market. And then once you've shown that you've proven that there is an audience, then you can maybe go to, and I don't think Disney is going to field any offers, but look how competitive animation is getting because Disney is just so in-house and so powerful. But look at all these new pop-ups. We just talked about Marza Animation getting an animated movie a year. Illumination Entertainment. Shrek was so popular because it turned the fairy tale genre on its head. And I think they did a great job with their Prince Charming and Shrek 2. That was one of my favorite parts, Rupert Everett doing the voice. So maybe you can convince some other company to try and say, oh, well, the fairy tales are so popular, but Disney isn't utilizing this aspect of the genre. Maybe you can. And also we're talking about more meta, children's films that are very appealing to adults, like the Lego Movie, and I think maybe there might be some aspects to your story there. So think outside the box, Natalie, and remember that while we all love Disney animation, they are not the be-all and end-all of, opportunities for those of you who are interested in that field, and I think other places will be more willing to take a risk, not only on story, but talent like yourself that's untested. So, Natalie, thank you for your question, and again, good for you. I'm very excited about your stuff, and if you do put up a strip or anything, let me know, and I'll see what I can do to forward it at least on my social media. But good choice with Flynn Rider, and everybody, thank you so much for tuning in today. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories, the viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.